That summer was relentless. The air over the city shimmered like gelatin, and the asphalt softened, leaving sticky, black marks on soles. For Lena, this time was measured by the ticking of a metronome. Orderly days in the restoration workshop, where time flowed slower than turpentine, the smell of varnish, old paper, and silent focus. She was working on a watercolor by an unknown early 20th century artist, a branch of blooming dahlia against a window. The work was meticulous, millimeter by millimeter. Under a powerful magnifier, she cleared away grime, consolidated the paint layer. It was her meditation, her anchor. Her husband, Artem, was the complete opposite. Dynamic, loud, smelling not of paint but of expensive coffee and fresh office dust. He was building a career at a development company, and his world consisted of presentations, negotiations, and endless, urgent calls. They had been married for 7 years. The phase of passionate creation of a shared world had smoothly transitioned into a phase of comfortable, well-furnished coexistence. They loved each other, Lena repeated to herself like a mantra, when she dined alone in the evenings while Artem worked late. Loved quietly, habitually, like loving an old, comfortable sofa. The betrayal came not in the image of a femme fatale, but in the form of weariness. Or rather, in how that weariness was noticed. The name, Mark, first appeared in their conversation as the name of a new architect invited to Artem's project. A real talent, Artem said, rubbing his stiff neck. But difficult, always in his own world. Today in a meeting, he sat the whole time drawing something in a notebook, not looking at the slides. In his voice, Lena caught not irritation, but curiosity mixed with respect. Mark entered their home a week later, at a dinner Artem called informal negotiations. He was not tall, slender, with a quiet voice and a gaze that didn't skim surfaces but seemed to try to discern the texture, the material things and people were made of. He was silent, nodded, and then his gaze fell on the easel in the corner of the living room, where that very dahlia watercolor stood. "Is that Korovin?" he asked, looking up from his plate. "Unknown artist," Lena perked up. "Why Korovin?" "The light. He applies it as if the paint isn't pigment, but dust caught in a window's beam. The dahlia isn't blooming, it's evaporating." They talked until 2 in the morning. They spoke about art, how color perception changes at different times of day, why modern cities are so faceless. Artem soon fell behind in the conversation, buried in his phone, occasionally inserting business remarks. Lena, however, felt a part of her awakening, one that had long slept under layers of domesticity and routine. Mark saw. He didn't just look, he saw. And in his gaze, there was no male appraisal, just a bare, almost scientific curiosity about her inner workings. After that dinner, everything went downhill. First, a chance meeting at a museum, where Lena stopped after work, and Mark was sitting on a bench in front of a Serov painting, sketching in a notebook. Then he offered to show her an old mansion his firm was renovating, so you can see how we tried to breathe soul into stone. They wandered through empty, dusty rooms with moldings, and he told stories of former residents as if he knew them personally. Lena laughed, and that laughter rang in the silence of the abandoned house unusually loud and free. She hadn't planned to cheat. It wasn't about lust. It was about the fact that next to Mark, she stopped being Artem's wife, restorer Lena. She became simply a person whose thoughts were interesting to someone. He listened to her so attentively, as if deciphering an ancient scroll. Artem listened with half an ear, already ready to give advice, solve a problem, move to the next item. The first betrayal wasn't physical. It happened the moment Lena, talking to Artem over breakfast, caught herself thinking, "I should tell Mark about this. He'll understand." She walled off a piece of her inner life and mentally gave it to another. It was a betrayal of trust, of partnership, of a shared language. Physical intimacy came later, as an inevitable consequence. It happened in that same workshop, late at night. Mark dropped by, for a minute, to see the finished dahlia piece. They spoke in whispers, as if afraid to scare away the silence. Then he touched not her, but the glasses she had taken off to rub her eyes. His fingers were stained with ink and watercolor. And that gesture, intimate but not sexual, brutally exposed the emptiness of her tactile contact with Artem, which had been reduced to habitual cheek kisses and rare, tired sex. It wasn't passionate. It was quiet, swift, and almost awkward, among jars of brushes, under the white, cold light of the lamp. Afterwards, there was neither shame nor ecstasy. There was a cold, crystalline clarity. A line had been crossed. The pattern of her life had cracked. She became a master of doublethink. She kissed Artem in the morning, knowing she would get a message from Mark in an hour. Discussed vacation plans with her husband, mentally calculating when she could steal a few hours. Her world split into black and white, into before and after, but the edges of the rift were so sharp they cut with every thought. Artem noticed. Not immediately. He noticed she had become calmer. Asked less about his work, worried less about little things. He took it as a sign of stability, was even pleased. Once, hugging her from behind while she washed dishes, he mumbled, "It's so good that we have this solid foundation. You know, Stacy and her husband are fighting again, out of nowhere." Lena froze, looking at the soap suds. Images flashed through her head. Mark kissing her neck in a half-ruined room of the mansion. Her own lie about a girls' night at a friend's. And that solid foundation sounded like a sentence. She tried to break it off. Twice. The first time, she wrote Mark a long, guilty message. He replied with one sentence, "I'm not holding you. I'm just standing here, where you found me." And she returned. Because he didn't demand, didn't pressure, didn't make plans. He was a shadow, a quiet refuge from Artem's loud world, where she was suffocating. The second time, she mustered her willpower and held out for 3 weeks. She lived in a state of constant inner trembling, like a drug addict in withdrawal. And then Artem, unknowingly, dealt the decisive blow. They were watching a movie where the heroine cheated on her husband. Artem snorted. "What a fool. If you want adrenaline, you can go skydiving, not ruin a family. Cheating is for the weak, who can't sort out their own heads." Lena shrank into the sofa. In his words, there wasn't a shadow of doubt about their solid foundation. He was so sure of the strength of their world, of her role in it. And that confidence, that blindness, seemed to her the highest form of neglect. He didn't see her, didn't see the quiet despair in her eyes, didn't see her withering away like the dahlia in that watercolor. That night, she wrote to Mark, "Let's meet tomorrow." What became fatal wasn't a specific moment, but the accumulated weight of 1,000 small betrayals, of herself, her principles, the person sleeping next to her who believed in her fidelity. She hadn't betrayed him only when she first ended up in bed with another. She had betrayed him every day, putting on the mask of a dutiful wife, kissing her husband, lying about her feelings. The physical betrayal was just the bitter period in that long, dirty sentence. The climax was approaching inexorably, like a headache before a storm. Lena felt she was playing a game whose rules she had forgotten, with stakes that had become too high. And the ticking of the metronome in her workshop now sounded like a countdown to the end of the world, which she herself had created. That summer gave way to a rainy autumn. The wind tore yellowed leaves from the trees and hurled them against the wet workshop windows. The dahlia on the watercolor had long been restored, the work accepted by the museum, but in its place now stood another sheet. A sketch of the facade of that very mansion Mark had once shown her. The draft was in his hand, a light, precise line. Lena couldn't bring herself to put it away. It was like a scar, a reminder of another reality that existed parallel to the main one. Her relationship with Mark had turned into a strange symbiosis of silence and understanding. They rarely spoke of the future, almost never of Artem. Their meetings were islands of suspended time. Mark's studio, cluttered with blueprints and models, rare trips out of town to semi-abandoned churches or estates he loved to explore. With him, she felt like a co-conspirator in a secret, not an adulteress. He was as much a recluse from the mundane as she was. Their connection was fed not by passion, but by a shared sense that the outside world was too loud, simple, and tactless. But the crack she had made in the foundation of her life began to widen, acquiring new chips. The first to notice was Marina, Lena's colleague at the workshop, a woman with a sharp eye and a sixth sense for other people's dramas. "Are you on a diet or something?" she asked one day, watching as Lena turned to the window, scrolled through messages on her phone. "You've lost weight. Or are you in love? Both options are dangerous for a married woman." Lena brushed it off with a joke, but inside she went cold. She had become noticeable, and therefore, vulnerable. Then, the lies began to take their toll. Before, she had lied rarely and clumsily. Now, lies built into complex, multi-level structures. To carve out 3 hours for a meeting, she had to invent a reason, notify witnesses, colleagues, mutual friends, prepare answers to Artem's possible questions. She lied about trips to archives, sudden trips to examine paintings in the region, about girls' nights out. Each lie required energy, and that energy was taken from the shared resource that had once nourished her marriage. She returned home drained, her only desire to lie down and not move, not speak, not pretend. Artem, meanwhile, was on the rise. His project with Mark had won an award. He began to talk more about the future. About building their own house outside the city, about a child, whose postponement they had somehow failed to notice. Imagine, he said, putting his arms around her shoulders, looking out the window of their living room at the city lights, our own plot. A studio for you with northern light. And a nursery. It's time, Lena. It's time for both of us. His words fell into the silence like stones into a swamp. She nodded, smiled with the corners of her mouth, while inside a wave of panicked, animal terror rose. A child? A house? That meant cementing forever the life from which she had already mentally escaped. It meant burying the part of herself that only came alive with Mark. In those moments, she hated Artem for his blind confidence, for his plans built on the ashes of her feelings. Mark, however, seemed to exist outside these categories. When she, choking on guilt and fear, once asked him, "What are we doing? Where is this all going?" he just shrugged, without looking up from his sketch. "We're breathing, Lena. You forgot how to do that in your perfect, stuffy little world. I'm just reminding you how to breathe deeply. And where does breathing lead? Nowhere. It just is." His philosophy of here and now was both an anchor and an excuse. It allowed her not to think about tomorrow, but also deprived her of hope for any tomorrow for the two of them. He was a shadow, convenient, cool, but you couldn't make a home in it. The breaking point came in November. It was Artem's birthday. A big party at a trendy restaurant, 20 guests, his colleagues, their mutual friends. Lena organized everything. From the menu to the gift, an expensive watch he'd wanted for a long time. She played the role of the perfect wife, smiled, joked, held his hand. And all the while, she felt like an actress on stage, performing in a terrible, fake play. Mark was among the guests. He came with a neutral gift, was polite, somewhat aloof. Their eyes met across the room, and in those fleeting glances there was more intimacy than in the whole evening next to Artem. At one point, when Lena went to the ladies' room to take a break from the mask, Marina slipped out after her. "Interesting," her colleague said quietly, fixing her lipstick in the mirror. "Does your husband know how his new star architect looks at you?" Lena froze. In Marina's eyes, there was no condemnation, only the cold curiosity of a predator sensing weakness. "What do you mean?" Lena asked, her voice hoarse. "I mean I'm not blind. And I'm not the only one. Be careful, dear. Games like this in our little pond quickly become public knowledge." That was the first alarm bell. Loud and clear. Everything could collapse at any moment. From one careless phrase, one random witness. Returning to the table, Lena downed a glass of wine in one gulp. Her gaze fell on Artem. He was flushed, happy, with his arm around a friend's shoulder, telling a loud story. He was full of life, confidence, plans. He was building his future on sand, not knowing there was emptiness beneath his feet. And in that moment, through the alcoholic fog and panic, a strange, almost physical feeling came over Lena, not guilt, but a burning, unfair resentment towards him. For making her a liar. For not seeing that he was being lied to. For his world being so sturdy that she had to blow it up to escape. That night, at home, drunk and content, Artem reached for her. And for the first time since the affair began, Lena pulled away. Not because she felt guilty before him, but because her husband's touch, his smell, his hands, everything began to feel alien, almost hostile. She had betrayed not only him. She had betrayed herself, her own body, which now unconsciously resisted what had once been familiar and safe. "I'm tired," she mumbled, turning onto her other side. "Okay," he agreed easily, already falling asleep. Sleep. He didn't even feel the distance that had grown between them like an ice wall. His trust was absolute and, as Lena now understood, murderous for them both. The next morning, with a heavy head and a heart of stone, she understood. This couldn't go on. The game had reached a stalemate. The fear of exposure had become stronger than the fear of losing Mark, and even stronger than the fear of staying in the cage with Artem. She had to decide something. And for the first time in many months of passively drifting with the current, she made a decision. She would write to Mark that it was over. For good. Not meet for a final talk. Just cut everything off. And then she would talk to Artem. Not confess to the affair. That would kill him and destroy any chance of anything. But she would say she was suffocating. That they needed help. A pause. Separate bedrooms. A therapist. Anything. She would try to clear the rubble in her marriage, if anything living was left there. This decision brought her a ghostly relief. A plan of action, even a desperate one, was better than paralyzing uncertainty. She sent her message to Mark on Monday morning, from the workshop, short and dry. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Don't write or call. It's over. Then she turned off her phone. All day she walked around as if in a dream, her hands shaking, her heart pounding somewhere in her throat. But inside there was also an empty, scorched space where, perhaps, something new could be built. She bought Artem his favorite pastry, decided to cook dinner. She came home early. The key turned in the lock, and she heard voices in the living room. Artem should have still been at work. But his laugh was unmistakable. And another voice, low, calm. Mark's. Lena froze in the hallway, unable to move. Her ears rang. Fragments of conversation drifted from the living room. Brilliantly worked out the details, Mark, honestly. Only thanks to your idea, Artem, with the financing. Shall we drink to success? I have some good cognac here. They were drinking cognac. In her house. In the middle of a workday. And laughing. Carefully, on tiptoe, she approached the half-open door. And saw them. They were sitting opposite each other. Artem, animated, hospitable. Mark, with his usual semi-present look. And in his hand, Lena saw the familiar leather-bound notebook. The very one in which he had sketched at the museum, in which he had drawn sketches for her. And then Artem, laughing, said a phrase that made Lena's blood run cold. Oh, show him, Mark. Show him that very sketch. You always carry it with you. Mark smiled his restrained smile and opened the notebook. Lena held her breath. Now he would show. What? The sketch of the mansion? Her profile, drawn in the workshop? He would betray her here and now, on her own turf, turning their secret into a spectacle? Mark flipped through the pages, then stopped and turned the notebook around to show Artem. Here, the very first concept sketch. Made on the day of our first meeting. Lena, risking being seen, leaned against the doorframe, trying to see. It wasn't the mansion. And it wasn't her. It was a schematic but brilliant sketch of a public space, the one that had become the basis of their winning project. Artem's project. Wow, Artem said with admiration, studying the drawing. Captured the essence right from the start. I thought back then. The guy's talented, but lives in the clouds. Turns out, he just sees very deeply. Mark glanced at the drawing, and for a second something flashed in his eyes that sent a shiver down Lena's spine. Tenderness? Possessiveness? Triumph? Yes, Mark said quietly. I see what's most important. And I keep it to myself. Until the time is right. At that moment, his gaze slid from the drawing to the doorway and met Lena's. He wasn't surprised. He didn't look away. He just looked. With the same chilling, analytical interest with which he had once examined the Dahlia watercolor. As if she weren't a living woman, but another interesting object, part of a complex composition called Artem's life, into which he had so successfully inserted himself. And then, like lightning, a new, terrifying picture formed in Lena's mind. The chance meetings. His interest not only in her, but in her husband, in his work. His philosophy of here and now, allowing him to avoid responsibility. His notebook, always with him, like an instrument of observation and documentation. He didn't love her. Perhaps he wasn't capable of love in the usual sense. He was a researcher, an artist of life, and he had chosen them, her and Artem, as an interesting plot. A beautiful, refined wife, not finding understanding with her practical, successful husband. A classic triangle. He had entered their lives not to steal her, but to study, to feel, to sketch in his inner notebook. And perhaps, through her, to penetrate deeper into Artem's world, to become closer, more needed to him. Their project, their shared success, was it an accident? Lena recoiled from the door, unable to bear his gaze. She heard Artem calling her, Lena? Is that you? Come join us, Mark dropped by. But she was already running to the bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. Her heart was pounding wildly, but now it was not panic, but a clear, cold realization. She had thought she was playing a dangerous game of love and betrayal. But she had turned out to be merely a detail, a shadow on the blueprint of someone else's design. Her infidelity, her torment, her inner division, all of it was just interesting material. And the most terrible thing was that, standing now behind the locked door, listening to the two men laughing in her living room, she didn't know whom to hate more: her husband for his blindness, her lover for his inhuman curiosity, or herself for allowing all of them to use her, to turn her life into a cheap, banal plot worthy only of being sketched in a notebook and forgotten. There was no end. There was only a new, deeper and darker crack, reaching into the very core of her world. And this time, it ran not only through her marriage, but through her very soul. The bedroom door remained unknocked. A few minutes later, Lena heard the front door slam. Mark was gone. Then, cautious footsteps in the hallway. A knock. "Lena, are you okay?" Artem's voice was concerned, but not alarmed. He probably thought she had a migraine or a sudden illness. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Yes, I just felt sick. A headache. I'll lie down. Open up, I'll get you some water." "No, don't." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She checked herself. "Thank you, honey. I just need to sleep. Please." A pause behind the door. Artem was clearly uncomfortable. His celebration, his good mood, and here, female hysterics, that's likely how he perceived it. "Okay, rest. Should I order dinner? I'm not hungry." The footsteps retreated. Lena pressed her forehead against the cool wooden surface of the door. Inside, chaos reigned. The image formed in the living room kept spinning before her eyes, acquiring new, frightening details. "I see what's most important. And I keep it to myself." Mark's words took on a sinister double meaning. What did he keep to himself? The project sketch? Or the knowledge of his affair with Lena? Or both, as trumps in some complex game? The rational part of her brain tried to soothe. "You're being paranoid." He just got his bearings and showed a work page. But instinct, the one that had long slept under layers of lies and self-deception, screamed, "No." That was the look of a co-conspirator. The look of someone who knows he's being watched, and uses it. She turned on her phone. The message to Mark showed, delivered. No reply. And there wouldn't be, if he was following the rules. But whose game's rules? Lena walked to the window. Outside, dusk was falling, streetlights flickering on. The city lived its life, unaware of the little drama playing out in one of its cells. She felt like a lab mouse being watched through glass. Watched by two. One, unaware of the experiment's existence. The other, documenting every movement. She had to act. But how? Confess to Artem? After today's scene, it would look like a hysterical attempt to get back at him for a non-existent slight. He would never believe in Mark's cold calculation. He would only see a jealous wife targeting his successful colleague and friend. Or maybe that's exactly what Mark was counting on. To make her position shaky, to make her seem unstable? She decided to start small. With cleansing. The next day, saying she was going to an archive in a neighboring city for a day, Lena rented a room in a cheap hotel. She took an old laptop, a new SIM card, and a box of trinkets associated with Mark. That postcard with the mansion sketch, movie tickets, a dried flower he'd once picked and given her. A ritual of destruction. She tore the papers into tiny pieces and flushed them down the hotel toilet. Crushed the flower to dust. Deleted all correspondence, photos, cleared the cloud. It was an act of symbolic killing. Not of Mark, but of the Lena who had allowed this affair. Returning home, she felt emptiness. But it was a clean, sterile emptiness, like after surgery. Now she had to patch up the marriage. Or figure out if it was even possible. She started spending more time with Artem. Not out of guilt, but from a cold curiosity. Who was this man she had lived with for 7 years? What did she really know about him? She asked questions about his childhood, about dreams he'd had before his career, about fears. At first, he was surprised, brushed it off with jokes. Then, sensing a sincere, if desperate, interest, he began to open up. She learned he was afraid of heights but had gone skydiving to prove to himself he could do it. That in his youth he'd written strange, dark poetry, which he later burned. That his real, secret passion wasn't architecture, but sailing, but he'd chosen the more reliable path. The discoveries were bitter. They were strangers. In those 7 years, they had never reached these layers. They had been building a shared future without fully knowing each other's past. And now, trying to learn it, it felt like an archaeological dig on a battlefield. Interesting, but too late. Artem, in turn, began to change. Her attention, her quiet, focused presence, which she tried with all her might to maintain, clearly pleased him. He started coming home more often, canceling meetings. One evening, he brought not dahlias, but a huge bouquet of simple daisies. "Just because," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I missed you. Missed us, the real us." And she realized he felt the same, that they had taken a wrong turn somewhere and were now trying to find their way back to the path. His efforts were touching and terrifying at once, because he was trying to return to something that perhaps had never existed. Or had, but which she could no longer feel. Her feelings for him were like moth-eaten fabric, seemingly intact, but would tear if pulled. Mark vanished. He didn't call or text. But his presence was felt in every call Artem took from work. "Going to the site with Mark today. I'll be late." In his admiring stories about the architect's new ideas, in the very success of their joint project, now discussed in professional circles. He became a shadow in their home, an uninvited but firmly entrenched guest. And Lena knew. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was waiting, observing, sketching a new twist in the plot in his notebook. Reconciliation attempt. Her paranoia grew. She began checking Artem's phone, something she'd never done, looking for traces of Mark in his correspondence. Nothing suspicious. Only work. Dry, specific. This didn't calm her, it angered her. So, Mark was being careful. So, he really was plotting something. The climax came where no one expected it. Artem received an offer for a new, dizzying position, to head a development division in Moscow. It meant moving in 3 months. A new life. A clean slate. "This is our chance, Lena," he said, his eyes burning with the same excitement from 7 years ago. "To start everything from scratch. You can get a job at any museum or open your own studio. We'll buy an apartment with that studio. And, think about a child. Away from all this hustle." Lena listened, and an icy lump formed in her chest. Escape. He was suggesting escape. But you can run from circumstances, not from yourself. And not from the shadow that, as she now understood, sat not outside, but inside her. "What about Mark?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Your project? You're such a successful team. Mark is a genius, but he's not a team player. He's a loner. For the next stage, I need different people. Besides," Artem lowered his voice, "between us, he's been kind of unstable lately. Says strange things. Like he's not quite in reality. Talent has its price, I guess." This was new information. Unstable. Strange things. Lena felt goosebumps run down her spine. Like what? "Oh, little things. Says true beauty is born only from decay. That our successful project is actually a tombstone for the old neighborhood. Kind of gloomy. Not good for business." Ideas that once seemed deep and poetic to her now sounded like symptoms of an illness in Artem's retelling. Maybe she really had been wrong? Maybe Mark was just a lonely man slightly obsessed with his art, not a cold manipulator? She agreed to the move. Not because she believed in a new beginning, but because it was a logical way out. To distance herself physically from Mark. To look at her marriage in new surroundings. And maybe, finally, to breathe without looking back at the shadow in the corner. Preparing for the departure became a kind of medicine for them both. They were busy with piles of documents, house hunting, packing. A shared task brought them together, provided neutral topics. Sex between them resumed, quiet, cautious, more like a ritual of reconciliation than passion. Lena allowed it, closing her eyes and imagining nothing. Just white noise. 2 weeks before the move, Artem flew to Moscow for final negotiations. Lena was left alone in the half-empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes. The silence after the noise of preparation was deafening. And it was into this silence that Mark called. His voice on the phone was as even and calm as if they had parted yesterday and nothing significant had happened. "Lena, we need to meet. We have nothing to talk about, Mark. You're wrong. It's not about us. It's about Artem, and what you don't know." Her heart skipped a beat. "Blackmail? A confession? I don't want to know anything. You already know, you just don't want to see it. Come tomorrow to our cafe. At noon. If you don't come, I'll come to your house. Or call Artem. Your choice." He hung up. Lena sat on a box of books, gripping the phone until her knuckles turned white. He had taken control again. He knew she would come. Because she was afraid for Artem. Because, despite everything, she didn't want to hurt him that much. And because, deep down, she wanted to look this man in the eye and understand who he really was. Their cafe was a little place near Mark's studio. Lena arrived early and took a corner table. He entered exactly at noon, with the same notebook under his arm. He looked tired but composed. He sat down opposite her and for a while just looked at her, like an artist at a model. "You've lost weight," he stated finally. "What is this about, Mark? Speak. You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "Yes. Bad idea. You won't escape." "We're not escaping. We're starting a new life." He smirked, and for the first time, bitterness tinged that smirk. "There's no such thing as a new life. There's only a continuation of the old one, in new scenery. Artem won't build you a studio. He'll build a bigger golden cage. And you'll wither away completely in it, like that dahlia of yours." His words hit the very core of her secret fears. But now she was ready. "That's none of your business. What did you want to say about Artem?" Mark leaned back in his chair, paused. "Have you ever wondered why he became so attached to me? Why he trusts me so much? You're talented. You made a successful project together." "Project?" Mark snorted contemptuously. "Dust. It's not about the project. It's about what I gave him that he always lacked. Not just a partner. Not just an architect. I gave him meaning. Depth. He, a simple developer, suddenly became part of something bigger. Art, history, as he thinks, genius. I made him special in his own eyes. And he bought it, just like you." Lena felt a chill spread through her body. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're both mine. My most successful projects. Living ones. Artem is the form, the framework. Strength, ambition, but emptiness inside. And you, the content. Sensitivity, pain, an inner world searching for an outlet. I connected you, first in the project, then, in life. Or rather, in your infidelity. It was perfect. A triangle where everyone plays their role." He spoke calmly, like a lecturer. Lena felt physically ill. You planned all of this? From the beginning? You can't plan. You can only create conditions and watch as beauty grows through the cracks on its own. I saw cracks in both of you. In you, a thirst for understanding. In him, a thirst for greatness. And I became the one who filled those cracks. For each of you, in my own way. He opened the notebook and began flipping through. Lena saw familiar sketches. The mansion, her profile, the project plan. And further, sketches of her and Artem. Artem at his desk. Her, looking out the workshop window. Them together at dinner. They weren't photographic sketches, but more like emotional studies, where a few lines conveyed the essence. His confidence, her detachment. "Why?" she exhaled. "For what?" Mark closed the notebook. "To document the process of decay. Or creation. It's a matter of perspective. You think you were building something together. In reality, you were quietly drifting apart, like continents. I just accelerated the process. And sketched it. It will be my best work. Not a building. A story. Your story." Lena stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her head was clearer than ever. "You're a sick man, Mark. Perhaps. But I'm honest. I never pretended to love you. I was interested in you. As a phenomenon. And Artem. He believes I'm his friend. And that's his tragedy. He loves the one who studies him like an insect." "I'll tell him everything," Lena hissed. "He should know." Mark looked up at her, and for the first time, something like a living emotion flickered in his eyes, anticipation. "Tell him, please. I'm curious what he'll choose. To believe his hysterical wife, who suddenly accuses his best friend and colleague of unimaginable manipulation. Or to preserve his perfect picture of the world, where he's a successful man surrounded by loyal people. Where you're a faithful wife who's just a little tired. Let me guess? He'll choose the picture. Because the truth will shatter him. And he's not the type who likes to pick up the pieces." He was right. Terribly, disgustingly, cynically right. Artem wouldn't believe her. He wouldn't want to believe. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked, almost without hope for an answer. "Because the project is complete. You're leaving. The finale. I needed to draw the line. To hear your voice, see your reaction. It's the final stroke." He looked at her again with that analytical interest. "Thank you, Lena. You were magnificent material." He put money for the coffee on the table, stood up, and left without looking back. Lena remained sitting, staring into emptiness. She felt gutted, hollowed out. He had left her no anger, no hatred, not even the right to tragedy. He had turned her pain, her betrayal, her attempts to save herself, into material. Into a final stroke. She sat there for perhaps an hour. Then slowly got up and went home. The half-empty apartment was in the disorder of packing. She went to the window overlooking the city, the theater of her downfall. Now she had a choice. Stay silent, leave with Artem, and live with this poison inside, knowing their new beginning was built on lies and monstrous manipulation. Or tell the truth, blow up his world and, most likely, lose everything, but at least pull him out from under Mark's influence, open his eyes. But open them to what? That his wife had cheated on him? That the man he considered a friend despised him? Which of these truths would kill him faster? Lena picked up the passports and tickets from the table. Their flight was in 10 days. 10 days to make a decision that would determine the rest of their lives. She looked at her hands, the hands of a restorer, skilled at carefully bringing almost lost things back to life. Could she restore her own life? Or were some cracks too deep, and the only thing to do with such a vase was to throw away the shards and start sculpting something new from different clay? Outside, dusk slowly descended, dyeing the city in ashy, leaden tones. The shadow of the dahlia lengthened, merging with the general darkness, and it was already impossible to tell where the flower ended and the night began. 10 days. 240 hours. A period long enough to resolve oneself to anything, and simultaneously, negligible for making a fateful decision. For Lena, these days flowed in a strange, slowed rhythm, as if someone had set the speed of life to 0.75. She busied herself with mechanical tasks, calling moving companies, signing papers, packing the last items into boxes. Her body moved while her consciousness hovered nearby, observing herself from the outside, like an actress in a poorly written play. Artem returned from Moscow buoyant. The negotiations had gone brilliantly. They'd already seen an apartment, with a large balcony he immediately christened her future studio. He talked, gestured, made plans. Lena nodded, smiled with the corners of her lips while inside, the same icy, clear internal dialogue continued. The stay silent and leave option seemed logical. Safe. They would start fresh in a new city, where there would be no workshop smelling of turpentine, no half-ruined mansion, no Mark. Artem would build his career, she could finally focus on herself, as he liked to say. Perhaps even have a child, who would become new glue for their crumbling world. But the thought that the foundation of this new world would consist of unspoken infidelity and monstrous deception made her physically nauseous. She imagined looking at her sleeping husband in a year, 5, 10 years, and seeing not him, but the shadow of Mark standing between them. And his notebook. Always that notebook. The tell the truth option was like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. It meant not just confessing to infidelity. It meant telling a story in which he, Artem, would appear not as a hero, but as a blind fool, a pawn in someone else's game. His pride, his self-confidence, his worldview, all would be shattered. Could their marriage survive such a blow? Doubtful. Could he survive? She didn't know. And hovering in the middle, like a ghost, was a third option, to leave. Simply walk away alone. Say nothing. Leave Artem his perfect picture of a world where his wife didn't cheat, but simply couldn't handle the pressure and ran away. It would be cruel, but perhaps less cruel than the full truth. But to where? And why? Her own life, separate from Artem, seemed as empty and formless as a blank canvas she was afraid to make the first stroke on. On the 7th day, rummaging through old boxes in the storage closet, she found an album. Not a photo album, but a sketchbook. Their shared one, from the first years. Inspired by each other back then, they had tried to sketch moments. Sunday breakfast, the view from their first rented apartment, each other. Artem drew clumsily but with enthusiasm. She, more precisely, more carefully. Flipping through the yellowed pages, Lena saw not two lovers, but two people studying each other with interest. In one drawing, she depicted Artem sleeping, and tenderness shone through the lines. In his sketch, she was reading a book, and he had captured her expression of complete concentration. Where had all that gone? When did interest give way to habit, and study to the certainty that everything was already known? It was at that moment her gaze fell on a date under one drawing and a strange note in the margin. A phone number written in Artem's hand. Not his handwriting, but someone else's, angular. Next to it, the abbreviation, SC, and an amount. Lena froze. SC, security company? But why? The drawing was dated to the period when Artem was just starting his big project. That very one, with Mark. Something clicked in her memory. Once, at the very beginning, Artem had mentioned in passing some financing problems at the start. That there were risky moments. She hadn't delved into it, it wasn't her business. Now, this old note, accidentally preserved in the album, drilled into her brain. The word, decay, dropped by Mark, surfaced with new force. She stopped thinking. She acted on autopilot, picked up the phone, dialed the number. Someone answered on the second ring. Sigma Consult, how can I help you? Lena choked. A consulting firm, not security. Hello, I need to clarify information on an old project. Development company, Arc Style, Project, Renaissance Plaza. This is Artem Sokolov's wife. Papers rustled on the other end. The project is closed, data is confidential. Please direct inquiries to your company's accounting department. But it's urgent. It's about a possible audit before our relocation. Lena lied, her heart pounding in her throat. I just need the total amount for your services and the period. For reporting. A pause. The sound of typing. Risk management and independent expertise services for the project's initial phase. Period. March to August of last year. The amount. I cannot disclose over the phone. That's a violation. Okay, thank you. Lena whispered and hung up. Independent expertise. Risk management. At the start of the project, that very one. Why would Artem need third-party expertise? He always relied on his team and intuition. If he had doubts, he would have turned to someone he trusted. To a talented architect. To Mark. The puzzle pieces scattered in her mind began to shift, forming a new, even more alarming picture. What if Mark entered the project not just as a lone genius? What if he entered as a savior? As the one who, with his sketches and authority, helped pass some critical review? And what if his interest in Artem and in her wasn't merely artistic, but practical? What if he knew something? Something that gave him leverage? Nonsense. Paranoia. Exhaustion. Lena clutched her head. She was losing her footing. The truth was somewhere nearby, but each version seemed more implausible and frightening. That same evening, Artem came home earlier than usual. He was thoughtful and uncharacteristically quiet. Did something happen? Lena asked, setting a plate of dinner in front of him. He sighed, pushed the plate away. Mark is resigning. Lena froze with a salad bowl in her hands. Why? Where? Don't know. Submitted his notice today. Says he's exhausted himself here. That he needs new material. Artem ran a hand over his face. He's strange, but talented. A shame. That project might not have taken off without him. The last phrase hung in the air like a ringing hint. Why wouldn't it have taken off? Lena asked carefully. Artem was silent for a moment, looking at the table. There were problems at the start. With the soil. Old utilities on the site. Investors got nervous. And Mark. He had some old map, blueprints, managed to spin it all. Reworked the concept so the problems became a feature, a highlight of the project. He convinced everyone. The experts, too. With his charisma, I guess. With his power, Lena thought. With his knowledge. And these experts, they were independent? Her voice sounded foreign. Artem grew alert, looked at her. Yes. How do you know? Lucky guess. So he helped you out back then? Yeah, he helped. Artem stood up and walked to the window. And I was immensely grateful. Thought I'd found a friend. And he just used the situation to get into the game. To then watch it unfold. I realized that today. He looked at all of us, investors, me, contractors, like lab rats. Played with us. And I, the fool, believed in his friendship. Lena held her breath. He was so close to the truth. But he saw only part of it. Why do you think so? He said today, when resigning, Artem, you were an excellent protagonist. But the plot is exhausted. And smiled in a way. Like he was putting a period at the end of some experiment. It gave me the chills. Lena walked over to him, stood beside him. They looked into the dark window where their silhouettes were reflected. Artem, she began, and her voice trembled. What if the experiment wasn't just with the project? What if it was, with us? He slowly turned to her. His eyes held bewilderment, fatigue, and some deep, hidden pain. What are you trying to say, Lena? This was the moment, the chance, the last crossroads. She could turn onto the old, broken road of lies. Or step onto the new, unexplored and dangerous path of truth. She took his hand. His fingers were cold. I'm trying to say that Mark didn't just enter your project. He entered our lives. Deliberately. And I allowed it. I became part of his experiment. She spoke, quietly, without hysterics, almost monotonously, as if reading a protocol of someone else's crime. She didn't justify herself, didn't sob, didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply laid out the facts. Their conversations about art, the feeling of being understood, the loneliness in the marriage, the first betrayal, not physical but of the soul. Then, everything else, his manipulations, his notebook, their meeting at the cafe, his admission that they were both material. Artem listened without interrupting. His face became stony, lifeless. He withdrew his hand from hers. When she finished, a silence hung in the apartment so thick it could be cut with a knife. "Why?" he asked finally. A single question containing everything: pain, incomprehension, fury. "Because I was weak. Because I felt like you didn't see me. And he did. Turns out, he didn't see me, but an object for study. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. All this time?" His voice was hoarse. "While I was building our home, our plans, you were with him?" "No, not all of it. And that's no excuse. It's just a fact. I ended it. I tried to fix everything. To come back to you. But I couldn't. Because the truth sat inside like a splinter." Artem turned away. His shoulders tensed. "And our move? The new life? Was that an attempt to run from him? Or from yourself?" "From him, and from myself. And a chance to start honestly. If you can still give me such a chance. After everything." He laughed. Dryly, bitterly. "Honestly? You're saying, honestly, to me now? After months of lies? You know what's the most disgusting part? I believe you. I believe he's like that. That he could have orchestrated all this. Because today, looking into his eyes, I saw emptiness. Cold, curious emptiness. And I can't forgive him. But He turned, and tears of fury and humiliation stood in his eyes. "I can't forgive you either. You didn't become his victim, Lena. You became his accomplice. You let him into our home. First in your thoughts, then in body. You allowed him to destroy what we built for years. And you were silent. Silent while I believed in you, in us, in this pathetic, idiotic fairy tale about a new beginning." He grabbed the first thing from the table, a glass frame with an old photo of them, and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered with a dry, ringing crack. "So he was right," Artem shouted. "I really was a blind protagonist. In my own pathetic drama." "Artem, please, shut up." He sharply raised his hand, and she instinctively flinched. He had never raised a hand to her, but at that moment there was something alien, dangerous in him. "You know what infuriates me most right now? That I can't even be properly angry at you. Because part of me understands that I wasn't present. That I buried myself in my projects and ambitions and stopped seeing a living person next to me. And that voice whispers, what if you pushed her into his arms yourself? And the other part wants to smash everything to pieces. Starting with your face." He was breathing heavily, clenching and unclenching his fists. Lena stood pressed against the cabinet, unable to move. This was worse than she'd imagined. Worse than shouting, accusations, and immediate divorce. This was the agony of his faith in himself, in her, in reality. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "Tonight. You shouldn't have to see me." "Leave?" He laughed bitterly again. "Where? To continue his experiment alone? No. You stay. I decide. Not you." He paced the room, sweeping folders of documents off a side table. "Moscow," he growled. "What Moscow? What child? What studio? It was all built on lies. On his manipulations and your betrayal. I refuse. The project, the move, all of it. Artem, don't make rash decisions." "Rash?" He was enraged. "This isn't rash. It's the first sober thought in the last year. I refuse to live in a plot written for me by some psychopath. And with an actress who agreed to play the lead role." He stopped in front of her, very close. His breath was hot. "Here's my decision. Tomorrow, I terminate the contract with the Moscow company. I'll pay the penalty, it's fine. This house, this apartment, goes up for sale. Money split 50-50. You're free. Go to your genius madman if he still wants you. Or go wherever you want. But you will never enter my life again. Not as a wife. Not as a friend. Not even as a memory. For me, you no longer exist." Having said that, he turned, left the room, and a second later Lena heard the guest room door, now his room, slam shut and the lock click. She slowly slid down to the floor, onto the carpet littered with glass shards from their photo. She didn't cry. The shock was too great for tears. He had crossed her out. Erased her. Like an unnecessary sketch. And in a way, he was right. She had betrayed not only him. She had betrayed the very idea of their shared future. And now there was a future. Only it was separate. Divided by glass shards, words said forever, and the shadow of the dahlia that had finally consumed the flower itself. Mark's experiment was complete. The result summed up. The decay had occurred. The days that followed passed in a chilling, mechanical order. Artem did not emerge from his room until morning. Lena spent the night on the living room floor, unable to get up and lie in their bed, which was now just a bitter monument to the past. At dawn, carefully avoiding the shards, she packed a gym bag with the bare essentials. Passport, documents, a change of clothes, her brushes, and an unfinished miniature. A tiny copy of that very dahlia watercolor she had once restored. Artem emerged around 10. He looked as though he hadn't slept all night, but was utterly collected, almost calm. This icy composure was more frightening than yesterday's rage. "I've called a real estate agent," he said, not looking at her. "The apartment will be listed in a week. The lawyer is preparing the division of assets paperwork. You can stay here for now. I'm moving to a hotel today." Lena nodded. Words stuck in her throat like a lump. "Artem, I'm sorry." He finally looked at her. In his eyes, there was no hatred, no pain. There was emptiness. The same emptiness he had seen in Mark. "There is no forgiveness. There are consequences. Deal with them yourself." He picked up a pre-packed suitcase and left without looking back. The door closed with a soft but final click. Lena was left alone among the half-empty boxes and the shards of their shared life. She did not go to Mark. The thought of him now evoked only disgust and shame. He had won. He had gotten his finale, his material. She wasn't going to give him the pleasure of observing her further decline. Instead, she went to a studio on the city's outskirts that she had noticed long ago but never dared rent, too expensive, too far from home. Now, home was gone, and money from the apartment sale would come soon. She rented it for a month, paying with the last of her cash. It was a large, dusty room with a huge north-facing window, exactly the kind she had always dreamed of. Empty, without a past. The first days were like a heavy dream. She slept on a cot bought at a nearby store, ate whatever was at hand, and could sit on the floor for hours, staring out the window at the industrial zone. She did not cry. The tears came later, about 2 weeks later, when the official letter from the lawyer arrived with the draft agreement. Numbers, percentages, cold legalese. Party A and Party B. That's when it hit her. She wept for a whole day, sitting on the concrete floor of the studio, then fell asleep, exhausted, and woke with the feeling of having been turned inside out and hosed down. It was empty, but clean. She began to work, not on restoration, but on creation. From old parquet left in the studio, she began carving thin plates. On them, using a technique akin to ancient marquetry but with her own methods, she started recreating that very watercolor. The dahlia, but not whole, composed of hundreds of tiny wooden fragments of different shades, from dark oak to almost white maple. Deliberate, thin gaps were left between the fragments. Light was meant to pass through them, casting intricate shadows. This wasn't restoration. It was reinterpretation, transforming a fragile, elusive image into something solid, assembled from shards, yet still whole. The work saved her. Her hands remembered the movements, her mind focused on millimeters, on shades, on the angle of the chisel. During these hours, she did not think of Artem, or Mark, or herself. She was merely a conduit between idea and material. Once, returning from a lumber warehouse, she saw him. Mark. He was standing across the street, leaning against a wall, watching the entrance to her studio. In his hand, that same notebook. He did not try to approach, did not wave. He was simply observing. Lena froze. The old panic, the desire to run and hide, was replaced by a sudden, sharp fury. She crossed the street and walked straight towards him. He did not move, only slightly raised an eyebrow when she stopped before him. "Satisfied?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Satisfaction is not a category I operate with," he replied, as always, calmly. "The process is complete. I am documenting the epilogue. Are we still a process to you? Even now? Especially now. Decay is the most substantive phase. It reveals the essence. Yours, by the way, turned out to be more interesting than I assumed. I thought you would break. But you are building. From the wreckage. That is worthy of respect. His words, which once might have flattered or wounded, now bounced off her like armor. Go away, Mark, and never come back. If you come one step closer, I will pour a can of turpentine on your precious notebook and set it on fire. And I can't vouch for you either. She said it quietly, looking him straight in the eye. And for the first time in all their acquaintance, he reacted. Not with fear, no. But surprise flickered in his gaze, followed by something akin to curiosity shifting to a new level. I see, he said, and even took a step back. The material has slipped from control. Acquired its own will. That rarely happens. I am not material. I am a person, whom you hurt, alongside another person whom I myself betrayed. Now go. He nodded, more to himself than to her, made a final note in the notebook, closed it, and without a goodbye, walked away. Lena watched him go until he turned the corner. A strange feeling stormed in her chest, not victory but liberation. She had written herself out of his story. She had erased herself from his notebook. Life settled into a suspicious, frightening slowness. She signed all the papers from the lawyer. The money came. She invested part in setting up the studio, part she saved. Her work with the wooden dahlia caught the attention of a chance visitor, the owner of a small gallery. He offered to do an exhibition of small works in a similar technique. Lena agreed. She had a goal, unconnected to the past. She learned of Artem through mutual acquaintances who, having been rebuffed by him, sometimes called her. He had, it turned out, really broken the Moscow contract, paying a huge penalty. Quit, ARC style. At first, they said he'd started drinking. Then, that he'd gone somewhere up north, to the Solovetsky Islands, perhaps. As if searching for a place to shed the skin of his old life. Lena did not call him. Her right to participate in his life had been irrevocably revoked. 6 months passed. Her first mini-exhibition was titled, The Texture of Silence. The works, all those same complex, multi-layered wooden compositions where light played the main role. The dahlia was the centerpiece. On opening day, nervous and adjusting her dress, new, bought for herself, not for someone else's image, Lena saw a familiar figure in the gallery doorway. Not Mark's, Artem's. He was different, tanned, thinner, in a simple dark turtleneck and jeans. His posture lacked the former confident assertiveness, but had gained a different, deeper firmness. He stood looking at her dahlia. Lena froze by the wall, her heart hammering. He had come. Why? To make a scene? To throw another dose of anger in her face? He felt her gaze and turned. Their eyes met across the room. No smile, no nod. Just a look. Then he slowly walked towards her. The gallery guests, unaware of who he was, parted. Stopping 2 steps away, he said, The work is strong. Thank you. A pause. I was on Solovka, he said, as if it were a natural continuation of a conversation about art. For a month. Lived in a hut. Chopped wood. Walked the shore. Didn't speak to anyone. Why? To hear myself. To understand what was left of me when you, the job, the confidence, that whole house of cards were taken away. Turns out, something remained. Not much. But something very simple and heavy, like a cobblestone. He paused, looking past her at the wall. I don't forgive you, Lena. Not now, maybe never. What you did. He clenched his fists, then immediately unclenched them. But I've stopped hating you. Because I understood one thing. We were both clay in his hands. You, more pliable. I, more blind. And we both allowed it. For different reasons. My reason was pride. Yours, you know yours. He looked at her. I didn't come for reconciliation. There won't be any. We will never be husband and wife again. Or even friends. Too much poison. Too many lies. Then why? She whispered. To put a period. Not his period. Ours. To tell you to your face what I see. I see that you didn't break. I see that you found the strength to create something real. And I envy that. Because I have only just learned to chop wood and be silent. I haven't started building yet. There wasn't a drop of self-pity or pity for her in his words. There was only honesty, earned and frozen on northern winds. What will you do? She asked. I don't know. Maybe open a small firm. Not for skyscrapers. For houses. Simple, honest ones. Or maybe not. I'll go further. Haven't decided yet. He looked at the dahlia again. It's beautiful. But in the gaps. In those voids between the pieces. There's truth in them. Something whole would have been a lie. He nodded to her, briefly, almost businesslike, turned, and walked towards the exit. Lena did not stop him. Did not cry out, "Forgive me." Did not run after him. She watched him go and understood that this was their real finale. Not explosive, like in the apartment, but quiet, conscious, adult. They had released each other. Not because they had forgiven, but because they acknowledged. Some wounds do not heal, but one can learn to live alongside them without touching. A month after the exhibition, working on a new composition, Lena found an envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet, torn from a notebook. On it was a pencil sketch. She recognized her own profile, but depicted not elegantly, but sharply, angularly, with deep shadows. And below the drawing, a signature, the material that proved stronger than the artist. Farewell. She never heard of Mark again. They said he went abroad, to some art residency. His experiment was over. And perhaps he had finally grown tired of watching from the sidelines. Lena kept working. Her studio gradually filled with light, wood, the quiet whisper of the chisel. The dahlia assembled from shards, unified yet not hiding its seams, hung in the most prominent place. It was no longer a shadow. It was a memory, a warning, and proof that even from the bitterest betrayal, first and foremost of oneself, one could assemble something whole. Not perfect, not smooth, but one's own. And into the gaps between the shards, as Artem had said, light would break through. Real light, not painted.